UFC 314 is right around the corner, and that card will be happening on April 12th. And this card is filled to the brim with some amazing matchups in all the weight classes. Headlining this card will be Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes for the vacant featherweight title. And in today's video, I will be explaining why I think that Diego Lopes will probably beat Alexander Volkanovski by TKO, and why a lot of people are underestimating Diego Lopes because of the championship pedigree of Alexander Volkanovski. Before I get into my reasons, I just want to mention that I think that people are confusing the difference between who should win the fight on paper versus who is actually going to win the fight on April 12th. Because if you quantify like the skill sets of each fighter, obviously Volkanovski, he's probably the best pick to win this fight on paper. But when you look at the circumstances surrounding the fight, I think that those circumstances favor Diego Lopes to become the new featherweight champ of the UFC. So my first reason why I believe that Diego Lopes will defeat Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 314 is because of his explosive power and his aggression. And to be honest, if you're picking Diego Lopes to defeat Alexander Volkanovski, this is probably one of your top reasons as well. And it just comes down to that Diego Lopes, he is very dangerous in those first two rounds. He is very explosive and he is very powerful for the 145-pound weight class. And that type of power, I don't think Volkanovski is good at dealing with. We've seen what happened when he fought Ilia Topuria. And not only does Diego Lopes have some of that power like Topuria, he also has the aggression and that wild factor that I don't think that Alexander Volkanovski is used to dealing with. Diego Lopes has shown us in his UFC fights that if he lands clean, he can put people away really early and really quickly. When Diego Lopes fought Pat Sabatini, he knocked him out in the first round, and he basically just immediately pressured him and overwhelmed him with strikes and TKO'd him. In his fight against Gavin Tucker, in this fight in particular, I know that this doesn't really apply to this matchup because I do not believe that Diego Lopes will win this fight via a submission against Alexander Volkanovski, because Volk, his particular build and the way that he fights is very good for dealing with jiu-jitsu oriented fighters like Diego Lopes. Even though Diego Lopes won via submission against Gavin Tucker, it still showed off his ability to pressure his opponents, and ultimately his striking and his pressure on the feet really opened up that type of submission ability. We've seen in Diego Lopes' most recent fight at UFC 306, he basically knocked out Brian Ortega. And to be honest, in that fight, Diego Lopes, he knocked out Brian Ortega, and Ortega, he was basically knocked out cold, but that follow-up shot from Diego Lopes, it woke him up from being knocked out. So Diego Lopes has the power to crack the chin of someone who is as durable as Brian Ortega. He's definitely capable of knocking out Volkanovski at UFC 314. One thing in particular is that flying knee, and I believe the flying knee from Diego Lopes, that is going to be one of the most dangerous strikes that Volkanovski needs to worry about. We all know that Volkanovski, he's 5'6", and Diego Lopes, he is a tall 5'11", which is very tall for the featherweight division. And it's going to be easy for Diego Lopes to land those knees flush on Volkanovski's face. I think that is a potential way that Diego Lopes can win the fight because of his dynamic striking. Another strike that Diego Lopes can land on Volkanovski is going to be that uppercut in the clinch. When Diego Lopes fought Sadiq Yusuff at UFC 300, those uppercuts are what won him the fight. Every time Sadiq would try to initiate a clinch with Diego Lopes, Diego would fire a uppercut underneath Sadiq Yusuff's arms that he was trying to clinch with, and those uppercuts were landing flush on Sadiq Yusuff's chin. I think he dropped Sadiq twice in the span of like 1 minute. That type of strike is going to be open to land on a fighter like Alexander Volkanovski, especially since when Volk is striking, he does not tuck his chin. Fighters have to remember when you're striking in MMA, you have to tuck your chin. You can't leave your chin out in the open. And Volkanovski, he does this a lot. That's what got him caught against Topuria. I keep mentioning the Topuria fight, but that is Volk's most recent performance in the cage. And when you're considering how he's going to perform now, you have to see how his last performance went. And when he fought Topuria, he won the first round, in my opinion. But like I said, he was making some mistakes. And that is what ended up getting him caught in the second round. Now, my second reason why I believe that Diego Lopes will defeat Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 314 is because of the height and reach advantage. We touched a little bit on this in my first point, and we mentioned that Diego Lopes, like I said, he's 5'11", and Volkanovski is 5'6". And not only is the height a factor, but when you also consider the reach, Diego Lopes has a 72-inch reach, and Volkanovski has a 71.5-inch reach. These reaches are very similar. When you factor in the frame and height of Diego Lopes, he's going to be able to initiate striking exchanges where Volkanovski is not able to effectively reach him. And I know that Volkanovski has fought Max Holloway, who is also 5'11", but you have to consider Max Holloway has short arms for his height. And that is why Volkanovski was able to land those effective counter shots on Max Holloway, because Volkanovski, he has the reach advantage even though he's 5 inches shorter. But when you consider someone who is taller than Volk and has a comparable reach, a longer reach even, I think that Diego Lopes is going to be able to find the chin of Alexander Volkanovski when he's moving out of the pocket. Volkanovski has a bad habit of kind of trying to lean his head out of the pocket instead of fully moving out of range. And if Diego Lopes uses his reach effectively, he can catch Volk at the end of his punches and find a clean knockout shot when Volk tries to dip his head back. We've seen Volkanovski making these mistakes when he fought Ilia Topuria. As you guys can see, Volk is leaning out of the striking exchange without moving his feet. When you're dealing with someone who moves forward like Diego Lopes, that can be a huge problem, and that can lead to you getting knocked out. Because if you're not moving your feet back, when someone like Diego Lopes starts stringing together combinations, you're not going to be ready to move out of the striking exchange. So Volkanovski needs to work on that mistake in his striking if he wants to win this fight as well. Because as long as he leans his head back, like he did against Topuria, someone like Diego Lopes, they're going to string together combinations and find his chin. Now, my third and final reason why I think that Diego Lopes will defeat Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 314 is because of Volkanovski's age and his recent knockout losses. Volkanovski, he has been knocked out twice in his last 3 fights. And his first knockout occurred against Islam Makhachev, where he got knocked out with a head kick and then TKO'd. While that was a pretty bad knockout, it wasn't as bad as his next knockout against Topuria, because when he fought Topuria and when he got knocked out, he actually went out cold, and it was a very brutal knockout to witness. I watched the fight live and I was just stunned because Volk, like I said before, Volk was actually winning that fight and he won the first round. But no one can withstand the power of Ilia Topuria when you're caught clean on the chin. And unfortunately, Volkanovski, he lost his fight and the belt that night. And when you're dealing with back-to-back knockouts like that, especially at Volkanovski's age, those are not good signs to be looking at when you're fighting someone who also has knockout power like Diego Lopes. And a general rule of thumb when it comes to fighting, when you've got knocked out previously, you're going to get knocked out easier if you get caught with some of those same shots. And Volkanovski, he already got knocked out 2 times in a row. So it's going to be easier for him to get knocked out against Diego Lopes because he suffered so much damage from the first prior knockouts. And another thing that I want to mention, which kind of flows with my first point, is Volkanovski's age. And we all know when you age, the first thing to go is going to be your speed. And if Volkanovski can't compete with Diego Lopes in the speed department, that is going to be a huge detriment because Volkanovski, he uses his speed to land on his opponents. And if that speed advantage is no longer with him, that is going to be a bad night for Volkanovski at UFC 314. And I know that Volkanovski took a year off to let his chin and his brain recover. But what people forget to mention is that he also got older within that year at the same time. So, like I said, that means that Volkanovski, he's going to be slower than when we seen him against Topuria because of that aging factor. And just by him having that 2% reduction in his speed, that can lead to a fatal clean shot that Diego Lopes could land on him. So I just really wanted to just add some context into what Volkanovski will be facing when he steps into the octagon at UFC 314. I believe a lot of people are overlooking Diego Lopes when it comes to the striking aspect of this fight, because if Volkanovski takes Diego Lopes down and grapples, I think that Volkanovski, he'll win that type of fight. Because Diego Lopes, he does have some weaknesses. Obviously, his cardio, he needs to work on that. And I'm pretty sure he would have been working on that to prepare for a 5-round fight against Volkanovski. But Volkanovski, if he grapples, that is going to be his best path to victory. I'm not saying that Diego Lopes is just this perfect fighter. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying that Volkanovski, he's going to be stepping in the cage at UFC 314 with a very dangerous, powerful, explosive striker that kind of resembles some of the attributes of Ilia Topuria in some ways. When a lot of people are comparing the matchup between Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes, when you just mention the name of Alexander Volkanovski, you automatically think of the featherweight GOAT. All these title defenses, him completely demolishing Yair Rodriguez, him schooling Max Holloway, and him schooling Brian Ortega. But as a UFC fan, you cannot look at the matchup on paper because Alexander Volkanovski, his chin, I think that has diminished since those wins. I think that Volkanovski, his speed has definitely decreased since those wins. And like I mentioned before, he got knocked out twice going into this matchup. So on paper, when you think of Alexander the Great Volkanovski, yes, I believe that Volkanovski of 2020, 2021, that era of Volkanovski's career would beat Diego Lopes. But in 2025, after Volkanovski suffered 2 KO losses, I think that Diego Lopes is a very bad matchup for Volkanovski right now.